They laughed at the disabled athlete. Until she crossed the finish line first. She rolled up to the starting line in her racing wheelchair, feeling the weight of every skeptical stare, every whispered comment, every assumption about what someone like her could never accomplish. The other runners stretched their legs and adjusted their spikes, barely acknowledging her presence. They had no idea they were about to witness one of the most extraordinary athletic performances in the history of competitive racing. What happened next would silence every doubter, shatter every stereotype, and prove that when determination meets raw talent, absolutely nothing can stop her. Meet Isabella Rodriguez, a 19-year-old college sophomore who had been paralyzed from the waist down since a car accident when she was 12. For 7 years, she had endured well-meaning sympathy, lowered expectations, and the constant assumption that her athletic dreams had died along with the feeling in her legs. Isabella had been a promising young runner before the accident, winning local races and dreaming of Olympic glory. The crash had changed her body but not her spirit. While recovering in the hospital, she had made a promise to herself that would drive everything that followed. She would find a way back to competitive racing no matter what it took. The journey back to athletics hadn't been easy. Learning to navigate life in a wheelchair was challenging enough, but finding opportunities to compete in racing was nearly impossible in her small town in New Mexico. The local high school didn't have adaptive sports programs. The community college had never had a wheelchair racer. Most organized races in the area didn't even have categories for adaptive athletes. But Isabella refused to accept limitations. She researched wheelchair racing techniques online, studying videos of Paralympic champions and analyzing their form. She convinced her parents to drive her to larger cities where she could find coaches who understood adaptive athletics. She trained in empty parking lots and along quiet stretches of highway, building the upper body strength and endurance that wheelchair racing demanded. The breakthrough came when she earned a partial scholarship to State University, which had one of the few collegiate adaptive athletics programs in the region. For the first time since her accident, Isabella would have access to proper coaching, competitive racing wheelchairs, and the opportunity to race against other elite athletes. But even at State University, Isabella faced challenges that her able-bodied teammates couldn't imagine. The track and field team trained together, but she was often treated as an afterthought, the inspiring story that made everyone else feel good about themselves rather than a serious competitor with legitimate athletic goals. Coach Martinez, the head track coach, was well-meaning but had limited experience with adaptive athletics. He assigned Isabella to train with the distance runners, but her workouts were treated as separate from the team's main focus. While the runners prepared for conference championships and national competitions, Isabella's goals were seen as more modest. Maybe she'd compete in a few local adaptive races, hopefully inspire some people along the way. The turning point came when the university announced they would be hosting the Regional Collegiate Track and Field Championships, the most prestigious meet of the season. Elite athletes from across the Southwest would compete for spots at the national championships. The meet would include adaptive racing categories for the first time in the event's history. Isabella saw this as her chance to prove that she belonged on the same track as the best collegiate athletes in the region. She approached Coach Martinez about entering the 1,500-meter wheelchair race, which would take place during the main competition rather than as a separate exhibition. "Isabella," Coach Martinez said carefully, "I admire your enthusiasm, but this is a very high level of competition. These are athletes who've been training for wheelchair racing their entire careers. I don't want you to be disappointed." "Coach," Isabella replied, "I've been training for 7 years to get back to this level. I'm not asking you to lower standards for me. I'm asking you to let me meet the same standards as everyone else." Reluctantly, Coach Martinez agreed to enter her in the race. What he didn't know was that Isabella had been preparing for this moment far more seriously than anyone realized. While her official training schedule looked modest, she had been putting in additional hours that would have impressed even the most dedicated distance runners. Every morning at 5 a.m. before her scheduled team practice, Isabella was on the track working on speed intervals. She had studied the racing techniques of Paralympic champions and adapted them to her own style. She had convinced a local cycling coach to help her understand aerodynamics and racing strategy. Most importantly, she had developed the mental toughness that comes from years of being underestimated. News of Isabella's entry in the regional championships spread through the athletic community, and the reactions were mixed at best. Some people praised her courage and determination. Others questioned whether it was appropriate for someone with her level of experience to compete against elite adaptive racers. A few were openly skeptical about her chances and wondered if she was setting herself up for public embarrassment. The local sports media picked up the story, framing it as an inspirational tale about a brave young woman overcoming adversity. The coverage focused more on her disability and recovery than on her athletic abilities, which frustrated Isabella but didn't surprise her. She was used to being seen as a symbol rather than a competitor. "I wish just once someone would write about my training times instead of my accident," Isabella confided to her roommate, Maria. "I'm not trying to inspire anyone. I'm trying to win races." The week before the championships, Isabella faced her biggest challenge yet. During a routine training session, she discovered that 3 of the top wheelchair racers in the region had entered the 1,500-meter race. These weren't just collegiate athletes. They were Paralympic hopefuls with professional sponsorships and years of elite-level experience. Jennifer Walsh from Colorado had won the race 3 years running and held the collegiate record. Amanda Chin from Arizona was ranked second nationally in her age group. Sarah Johnson from Texas had represented the United States in international competition. When Isabella saw the entry list, she felt a moment of doubt for the first time in years. These women weren't just faster than her, they existed in a completely different universe of wheelchair racing. Their personal bests were times that Isabella could only dream of achieving. But that evening, as she sat in her dorm room looking at the photos of Paralympic champions that covered her wall, Isabella remembered why she had started this journey. It wasn't about proving she could win, it was about proving she could compete. And if she was going to compete, she was going to give everything she had. The morning of the championships dawned clear and cool, perfect conditions for distance racing. The stadium was packed with college students, families, and serious track and field fans who had come to watch the region's best athletes compete for national qualifying spots. Isabella arrived early to familiarize herself with the track and prepare her racing wheelchair. The machine was a marvel of engineering, ultralight carbon fiber with 3 wheels and a complex system of gears and brakes that allowed for precise control at high speeds. She had saved for 2 years to afford it, working part-time jobs and applying for equipment grants from adaptive sports organizations. As she warmed up, Isabella noticed the other wheelchair racers arriving. Jennifer Walsh looked every inch the professional athlete, with matching warm-up gear and a support team that included a coach and a mechanic. Amanda Chen was surrounded by teammates from her university program, all offering advice and encouragement. Sarah Johnson moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had competed at the highest levels of the sport. Isabella, by contrast, was alone. Coach Martinez was focusing on the able-bodied distance runners who had better chances of qualifying for nationals. Her parents had driven up from New Mexico to watch, but they waited nervously in the stands, unsure of what to expect. The contrast was stark and Isabella felt it. But she had learned long ago that being underestimated could be an advantage if you knew how to use it. The call room before the race was tense with nervous energy. The wheelchair racers sat quietly, some listening to music, others visualizing their race strategy. Isabella found herself studying her competitors, noting their body language and trying to gauge their confidence levels. Jennifer Walsh looked relaxed and focused, like someone who expected to win and was simply going through familiar motions. Amanda Chin appeared nervous but determined, constantly checking and rechecking her equipment. Sarah Johnson was completely still, her eyes closed in deep concentration. "First time at regionals?" Jennifer asked Isabella, not unkindly but with the tone of someone talking to a newcomer who clearly didn't belong at this level. "First time at this level," Isabella admitted. "But I've been racing for 7 years." Jennifer nodded politely, but Isabella could see the doubt in her eyes. 7 years sounded like a lot to someone who didn't know that most elite wheelchair racers had been competing for a decade or more. When they were called to the track, Isabella felt her nerves transform into focus. The stadium was fuller now, with several thousand spectators settling in to watch the distance events. The 1,500-meter wheelchair race was scheduled as the feature event of the afternoon, and Isabella could feel the energy in the air. As they lined up at the starting line, Isabella realized that this was the moment she had been working toward for 7 years. Every early morning training session, every mile of lonely highway runs, every moment of doubt and determination had led to this. She wasn't just racing against these 3 women, she was racing against every assumption about what was possible, every limitation that had been placed on her since her accident. The starter raised his pistol and the stadium fell silent. "Runners, take your mark." Isabella gripped the push rims of her racing chair, feeling the familiar texture of the rubber coating that had become like an extension of her hands. "Set." She leaned forward slightly, every muscle in her upper body coiled and ready to explode into motion. The gun fired. The start was crucial in wheelchair racing, and Isabella had spent hundreds of hours practicing her acceleration technique. She exploded off the line with a power that surprised even her, matching the pace of the more experienced racers through the first 100 meters. Jennifer Walsh, as expected, took the early lead with Amanda Chin right beside her. Sarah Johnson settled into third place, content to let the pace develop naturally. Isabella found herself in fourth place, exactly where her race strategy had called for her to be. The first lap was tactical, with the leaders keeping the pace honest but not overwhelming. Isabella stayed relaxed, focusing on her form and maintaining position with the leaders. She could hear the crowd cheering, but the sound seemed distant and unreal. As they passed the 400-meter mark, Isabella was still in contact with the leaders, and she felt a surge of confidence. She belonged here. She could compete at this level. The second lap was where the race began in earnest. Jennifer Walsh pushed the pace slightly, testing her competitors' fitness. Amanda Chin responded immediately, and the two women began to pull away from the field. This was the critical moment for Isabella. Her race plan called for her to move into contention during the second lap, but she was already working harder than she had expected just to maintain fourth place. The pace was faster than anything she had experienced in training. But as she watched the leaders pulling away, Isabella felt something ignite inside her. She had come too far and worked too hard to settle for fourth place in her debut at this level. She had promised herself that she would find out what she was truly capable of, and this was that moment. Isabella began to move. Her acceleration was gradual at first, just enough to close the gap with Sarah Johnson in third place. But as she drew alongside the more experienced racer, Isabella realized she felt stronger than she had expected. The months of brutal training, the extra sessions, the obsessive attention to technique, it was all paying off in ways she hadn't dared to hope. She passed Sarah Johnson on the backstretch of the second lap, and suddenly she was in third place with 600 meters to go. The crowd began to take notice. This wasn't in the script. The unknown racer from State University was actually contending for a podium position at the regional championships. Jennifer Walsh and Amanda Chen were still leading, but Isabella was closing the gap with each stroke. Her technique was smoother than it had ever been, her power output sustainable in ways that surprised her. She had found a rhythm that felt like she could maintain it forever. With 400 meters to go, one lap remaining, Isabella moved into second place. The stadium erupted. This was no longer just an inspiring story about a brave young woman participating in a race beyond her level. This was a legitimate athletic performance that no one had seen coming. Amanda Chin, the defending runner-up, found herself in third place watching an unknown racer surge past her. Jennifer Walsh, the three-time champion, suddenly had competition she hadn't prepared for. But Isabella wasn't done. As they entered the final lap, she could see Jennifer Walsh ahead of her, and for the first time she allowed herself to think the unthinkable. She could win this race. The final 300 meters of a 1,500-meter race are where champions are made. It's where months of training, years of dedication, and a lifetime of dreams either come together or fall apart under pressure. Isabella had never been in this position before. She had never led a race of this caliber, never felt the pressure of being the hunter instead of the hunted. But as she pulled alongside Jennifer Walsh with 200 meters to go, she discovered something about herself that 7 years of training had prepared her for without her even knowing it. She was ready. The two women were stride for stride, or stroke for stroke, as they entered the final turn. Isabella on the outside, Jennifer holding the rail on the inside. The crowd was on its feet, screaming with an intensity that neither racer had ever experienced. Jennifer Walsh had been in this position dozens of times before. She was the veteran, the champion, the favorite who was expected to find another gear when it mattered most. She reached deeper into her reserves, calling on the experience that had won her 3 consecutive regional titles. But Isabella had something that Jennifer didn't expect. She had 7 years of stored-up determination, 7 years of proving doubters wrong, 7 years of believing in herself when no one else would. As they straightened into the final 100 meters, Isabella found a level of performance she didn't know she possessed. Her stroke rate increased, her power output soared, and she began to pull away from the 3-time champion. 50 meters from the finish line, Isabella Rodriguez was leading the regional collegiate track and field championship 1,500-meter wheelchair race. The crowd noise was deafening. Isabella's parents were crying in the stands, unable to believe what they were seeing. Coach Martinez was running alongside the track, shouting encouragement and looking like he'd seen a miracle. Jennifer Walsh made one final desperate surge, drawing on every ounce of experience and competitive fire she possessed. For a moment, it looked like she might catch the flying Isabella. But Isabella had one more gear. In the final 20 meters, she opened up a gap that settled the race decisively. She crossed the finish line a full wheelchair length ahead of Jennifer Walsh, with Amanda Chen and Sarah Johnson trailing behind. The time on the clock read 3 minutes and 24.18 seconds, a new collegiate record, a new regional record, and a time that ranked Isabella among the top wheelchair racers in the world. But more than the time, more than the record, more than the victory itself, was the statement that Isabella had made. She had announced herself not as an inspirational story, but as a legitimate world-class athlete who happened to compete from a wheelchair. As she slowed down after crossing the finish line, Isabella was surrounded by competitors, coaches, and officials who couldn't quite process what they had just witnessed. Jennifer Walsh, despite her disappointment at losing, was the first to congratulate her. "I've never seen anyone race like that," Jennifer said, still breathing hard from the effort. "Where did that come from?" Isabella smiled, finally allowing herself to feel the joy that had been building for 7 years. "It came from everyone who told me I couldn't do it." The media frenzy that followed was unlike anything Isabella had experienced. Reporters wanted to know about her training, her background, her accident, and her dreams. Athletic directors from major universities called with scholarship offers. Sponsors reached out about endorsement opportunities. But the moment that mattered most to Isabella came 3 days later, when she received a phone call that would change her life forever. "Isabella Rodriguez?" the voice on the other end asked. "This is Coach Patterson from the U.S. Paralympic Training Center. We've been watching your race from regionals, and we'd like to talk to you about joining our development program." The Paralympic Training Center was where the best adaptive athletes in the country prepared for international competition. It was where Olympic and Paralympic dreams became reality for those good enough to make it. Isabella had gone from being a promising local athlete to a Paralympic prospect in the span of one race. 6 months later, Isabella was training full-time at the Paralympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. Her days were filled with technical training, strength work, and competition against the best wheelchair racers in the world. She had access to sports science support, nutrition expertise, and coaching that transformed her from a talented amateur into a professional athlete. But perhaps more importantly, she had become a symbol for adaptive athletes everywhere who had been told that their dreams were unrealistic. Her story spread through the Paralympic community and beyond, inspiring young people with disabilities to take up competitive sports and showing the world that athletic excellence comes in many forms. "Isabella changed the conversation about Paralympic sport," said Dr. Robert Hayes, Director of Adaptive Athletics at the Paralympic Training Center. Before her breakthrough, wheelchair racing was often seen as separate from real track and field. Her performance at regionals forced people to recognize that these are world-class athletes competing at the highest levels of sport. A year after that breakthrough race, Isabella qualified for her first Paralympic Games. Standing on the starting line in Tokyo, she remembered the doubt and skepticism that had motivated her for so many years. She thought about the coaches who had underestimated her, the competitors who had dismissed her, and all the people who had assumed that her accident had ended her athletic dreams. But mostly she thought about the promise she had made to herself in a hospital bed 7 years earlier. She would find a way back to competitive racing no matter what it took. As she settled into her racing position, waiting for the starter's commands, Isabella Rodriguez knew that nothing could stop her. Not the accident that had paralyzed her legs. Not the years of skepticism and lowered expectations. Not the world-class competition surrounding her. She had already proven that determination combined with talent could overcome any obstacle. Now she was ready to show the world what came next. The gun fired, and Isabella exploded off the line with the confidence of someone who had already achieved the impossible and was ready to do it again. Isabella Rodriguez had silenced every doubter and shattered every stereotype about what adaptive athletes could accomplish. She proved that when someone tells you that your dreams are unrealistic, sometimes the best response is to make them come true anyway. Her story became more than just an athletic achievement. It became a reminder that human potential has no limits, that excellence recognizes no boundaries, and that sometimes the greatest victories come from proving wrong everyone who said victory was impossible. In a world quick to place limitations on people based on their circumstances, Isabella Rodriguez showed that the only real limitation is the one you place on yourself. When determination meets opportunity, when talent meets training, when dreams meet action, absolutely nothing can stop what happens next. What dreams have you been told are unrealistic? What goals have others suggested you should abandon because of your circumstances? Share your thoughts, because sometimes the most important victories are the ones that show the world, and ourselves, what we're truly capable of achieving.